Welcome everybody to the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience. I know folks are filtering in, but as we get started, you want to hit record? It's recording? Oh, it's recording. So this is real now. I'm thrilled to welcome you all to the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience, both in person and online, for this presentation, Old Roads to New Roads, sponsored by the Dreyfus Estate and Hirsch family. With Brian Costello. I have just a few little announcements before we get started, just so everybody knows what's happening both tonight and in days going forward at the museum. We have virtual participants here tonight. There will be questions and answers. So in person, folks, just wait until you get this guy passed to you so that everybody in the room can hear your question, and folks online will read your questions out loud. Following this presentation, there'll be a reception in our museum store where Brian has graciously agreed to sign some books. And we'll have some snacks and some good conversations, some catch up with our family, because I know a lot of folks in this room are related. I want to take this moment to introduce Cindy, our membership manager, to speak just a tad bit about this really exciting campaign we have going on right now at the museum. I'm going to give you this because you got to talk. And actually, come here so that the people online can hear you too.
So, hi everyone, my name is Cindy. I'm the membership and grants manager here at the museum. Thanks everyone for coming tonight. I'm really excited for this program. And I just wanted to especially thank all of our members who are here tonight. Members are really important. They help us sustain these programs to keep them free all year long. And we've got some great programs coming up after this one as well. We have a really exciting membership program going on right now, where we have a donor who is matching all memberships that are recurring. So now's a great time to sign up, renew your membership, or join if you haven't joined yet. Hope to see y'all around the museum. If you have any questions, I'll be here after the program. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Cindy. Just a few, I'm going to get all the what's happening now, what's happening in the museum now, or like in the next few weeks done right now, so that at the end of the program, we can go get books signed, have a little bit of wine, and eat some snacks that are going to be very good. So in 2 weeks from today, please join us again, both in person and online, for a presentation, Remarkable Charitable Neighbors, which is a program of our Jewish Orphans Home exhibition. Co-curator Marlene Tressman and Jari Honore, genealogist who is best currently known as the guy who figured out that the Pope is Creole, will be here at the museum talking about the Jewish Orphans Home and the other two charitable institutions that were neighbors, which is Gilbert Academy and University of New Orleans. New Orleans University, which was a historically Black high school and college, and then the Orphans Home for Destitute Protestant Boys. So it'll be a fascinating conversation. And then a little bit further in November, we're actually going to leave the walls of the museum and go on a walking tour of Hebrew Rest Cemetery. And that is Sunday, November 23rd at 10 a.m. And it will be led by the executive director of Hebrew Rest Cemetery, Cliff Kern, and cemetery cartographer, Jacob Rosenzweig. So those are just two of the upcoming programs in the next 4 weeks happening at the museum, but there's so many more things that are happening. Join as a member, follow us on our newsletter to find out what else is going on. Okay, enough about what's in the future. Let's talk about tonight. I would like to get things started by introducing Howard Hirsch, who will introduce Brian. Howard Hirsch is the great-grandson of Blondina and Theodore Dreyfus, who, I think has a lot of connections to y'all in this room. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Howard, and we'll get started.
Howard.
Hold this and talk around that. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everybody. It is a real pleasure to be here for this event, which we've been looking to for a long time. My role here is not to take much time up here, but to introduce Brian and just comment briefly about his connection to our family. Brian Costello is a native of New Roads and a scholar of history. He's studied at LSU in undergraduate and graduate school. And he has written numerous books and publications on historical subjects relating to Louisiana and the South. And um, he he traces his roots to French ancestry. I know that you're in your bio here, but I see Costello as Costello, not Eaux. I wonder if that might have been changed at some point. Well, you can comment on that, when you're up here. But I think more importantly, it's to comment on how he became connected to our family. Brian has been very active in the charitable work and the community of New Roads. And I've learned that my late cousin Ray Weil was also very active in that. And they met there and made that was the way that our family became connected to Brian. And at some point subsequent to that, right around the time Ray Weil passed away, Brian was doing research for a book on Southern Jewish history in Louisiana and the South. And so the rest of the family started to communicate more with Brian. And I have to say, he charmed and fascinated every one of us. Both his intellect and his questions and his comments were something that were captivating. And we so look forward to the book and have enjoyed it. And we look forward to tonight very much. So on behalf of my mother, Rochelle Dreyfus Hirsch, my family, and all of the descendants and friends of Theodore and Blondina Dreyfus, I want to introduce Brian and welcome him to share some of his wisdom and comments with us. Thank you very much.
Well, good evening, and it's great to see older friends, not old age-wise, but friends from a good while ago, and to make new ones tonight as we look at vignettes of the Jewish history in Southeast Louisiana primarily. I'm indebted to the Dreyfus and the Hirsch families and the wonderful staff here at the museum for making this event possible. Also, I need to thank Ms. Carol Mills, who was my co-author in the book Dry Goods, Cotton, and Cane, which was specific to the Jewish families of Pointe Coupée Parish, Louisiana. She's a phenomenal genealogist, and I owe the genealogical part of the work back in the old world and here in Louisiana to her many years of research. And also we were helped by a colleague of hers, Ms. Terry Tillman. Ms. Mills, by the way, is descended from Jewish families from central Louisiana, primarily of Voiles and Rapides Parish. When you look at the title of tonight's presentations, it was suggested by Mrs. Rochelle Dreyfus Hurst, Old Roads to New Roads. Pointe Coupée Parish, you may know, is still in the French Triangle of Louisiana. It's bounded by the Mississippi, the Red, and the Atchafalaya rivers. And it's one of the oldest settlements in the entire Mississippi Valley, in fact. Early French and African settlement, and beginning in the Spanish period, Jewish settlement. New Roads is the parish seat. So Old Roads kind of makes you think about the paths people took from Europe to South Louisiana, where they made their livelihoods. If you look at the image on the screen, we're going to begin at the upper right, and we'll just touch upon some of the communities where some of the Jewish people settled and were merchants, farmers, and in the professions. That's a picture of Jacques Godshaw from France, one of many Godshaw families who came to Louisiana. He was a mobile merchant at a place called Waterloo, which was a port on the Mississippi River that was eventually taken by the river, as the Pointe Coupée shore, the west bank, is the recessive shore of the river. So that town no longer exists. Top center was the cover picture of the book, Dry Goods, Cotton, and Cane, and it shows the Weil, 1L, family of Pankerville, and Mr. Alphonse Weil was married to Rosina Dreyfus from Livonia, not Livonia, the province in Russia, Livonia in Pointe Coupée Parish. And their children, Mr. Simon Weil, whose daughter Dinah is here, and the Mrs. Katz, her sons are here with us tonight, Ms. Flora, who was an educator. And at the upper left was the Theo Dreyfus store at Livonia, that's on Bayou Gros Tête in southern Pointe Coupée Parish. Theodore Dreyfus came from Baden, and he worked for Max Meyer. Meyer, in turn, had been a partner in Gumbel, Meyer, and Loeb, names that you're familiar with here in New Orleans. And the Dreyfus family has been in Pointe Coupée Parish since about 1881. They're still prominent landowners. They produce sugar, and they have contributed so much to various aspects of life in our community, for which we're very grateful. In the lower left corner was the Sommer, S-O-M-M-E-R store that was at Taurus. Taurus was a town in northeastern Pointe Coupée where the levee broke in 1912, and that was the most disastrous flood in our history. And a lot of families, Jewish, African-American, Italian, French, began to leave Pointe Coupée Parish at that time. In 1912, when the levee broke, there were 26,000 people in Pointe Coupée Parish. 17,000 were made homeless. 12,000 were evacuated by train and steamers to Baton Rouge, Port Hudson, and towns west of the Atchafalaya Basin, and many of them never returned. But working in genealogy, you'd be surprised by how many people across the country come back to Pointe Coupée because they have roots in a community that had settlement since the 1720s. Lower center was the Wolf store. That was at Musson, M-U-S-S-O-N, which was near Maringouin in Upper Iberville Parish. Sigmund Wolf was the first of the family to come and was followed by Joseph Wolf. Joseph Wolf had partnered with Theodore Dreyfus in the Dreyfus business and married Wolf's sister, Blondina. And finally, in the lower right corner is a community that you're probably more familiar with because it had its own congregation, and that's Donaldsonville. And some of the leading families there were the Israels. There's advertisement for the Great Bazaar of Donaldsonville, the Lemons and the Blocks and the Blumenstiels. A lot of you will remember some of those names. And the synagogue remains in Donaldsonville, but it's been converted to commercial purposes. But the cemetery, of course, is still in existence. So we move on to the next panel. The Jewish families who came to Pointe Coupée arrived as early as 1770, and they were the Sephardi, primarily from Spain, and were merchants. And Jewish families and individuals continued to arrive as late as 1920. So you're looking at a long period of time. But despite the fact that we documented approximately 200 individuals and families who came to Pointe Coupée Parish, there never was a congregation that we know of, and there's no cemetery. A lot of the people were buried in New Orleans and also the nearby towns which had Jewish congregations, such as Donaldsonville, Plaquemine, St. Francisville across the Mississippi River, and also in the city of Baton Rouge, of course. The Sephardi who came were, like I said, from the Iberian Peninsula, primarily Spain, and they came via the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, and their Caribbean islands, including Cuba, Curacao, and Jamaica. And some of the earliest who came were surnamed Brito, Fastio, and Monsanto. And of course, you know the Monsanto name now because at the Monsanto Industries. The picture right down at the bottom was Angelica Monsanto, who married first to an Urquhart and married to a Dow, both of whom were Gentiles. So even in that early period, you had intermarriage between the Jewish and the Gentile families of Louisiana. Over at the left is a contract for the lease of a plantation from Manuel Brito to Isaac Heim, who's also Jewish, but from Germany. And at the lower left is the old Brito home place on Falls River that still stands. Over to the right, we see a letterhead for Sanman Gunst store. that was at a place called Merrick, Louisiana. Though you assume most of the time that these partnerships were men, the Gunst was actually Mrs. Israel Gunst, whose name was Preciosa Gonzalo Enriquez. So we have these Spanish names among the Sephardi who came to Louisiana. Another name that changed, their Levies came not only from France, but apparently some of them came from the Iberian Peninsula. And one family in particular changed the spelling of its name more to Levi. The German states, which were successors to the Holy Roman Empire and before the unification of Germany, probably contributed, along with Alsace and France, the most Jewish immigrants to Southeast Louisiana. And among the best known in the Pointe Coupée area were the Baum and the Jewel families. Over on the right, in the corner, is Aaron Baum, who was a Confederate veteran who founded a merchandising business on the Lower Chenal. He was married to a Julia Simon, and their only child, pictured next to him, was Simon Baum, who was not only a country merchant, but he was a sugar chemist, and also he grew chickens. The poultry business was a big one in our part of the state for many years. And below are pictures of the Jewel family. We don't know of an image of Benjamin Jewel, who had come from Hanover and was a merchant in Savannah and later Charleston, but he was married twice. And his first wife we see in the miniature was Sophie Prévost, who was a French Catholic immigrant from Saint-Domingue, the Haitian Revolution. And to the right is a painting of one of their children, Benjamin Jewel. Because she was Catholic, in most cases, the children, as you know, followed the faith of the mother, and the Jewels have been primarily Catholic and Episcopalian since their arrival in that part of Louisiana. To the left, we see some other names that came from the German states. One of them is Meyer, that's Max Meyer and Company, who we mentioned is the firm of Gumbel, Meyer, and Loeb. They had one of the pioneer drugstores in the interior, and that should be Muson Station, Iberville Parish, rather than East Baton Rouge Parish. This is just a little clipping from the Dunn and Bradstreet reports. One of the Meyer children was Mrs. Wackenheim, who you know of the Imperial Shoe Store here in New Orleans. Below, the firm of Simon Loeb and Company were merchants, and at the time of the Civil War, they printed their own currency. And we assume that cotton had the value that was exchanged for this paper money, in this instance, a 25-cent note. About the time of the war, Simon Loeb and Company, like many other country merchants, moved to New Orleans and prospered as commission merchants to supply the planters and the farmers with their needs. Below, we have Eisman and Company's advertisement of the Nina store. It was at Cook's Landing. That's another vanished community that was a port on the Mississippi River. And you'll notice that they had cottonseed, cane, and other produce was bought. That's how a lot of the country people traded. They brought the produce they had from home, or in some cases, they pledged their potential crop of cotton or sugar and received supplies throughout the year. And hopefully when the harvest came in, the value of their crops was more than their bill at the store, because if it didn't, they were in debt. And during times of floods and crop failures, the merchants themselves often went bankrupt as well. And the French language continued in Pointe Coupée Parish, we think in large part owing to the Jewish families who came from Alsace and other areas of France and were so prominent in business. They continued the French language that was native to the local population. You'll notice in Eisman's ad, American, not English, American, French, Creole, German, and Spanish spoken by the clerks. American is, even in my grandmother's time, if someone wasn't French, they were Américain, despite the fact that we've been American since 1803. And of course, Creole is a variety of French. It has an archaic French vocabulary and an African sentence structure. So it's a Francophone language, but it was spoken by the majority of the population who were of French and African descent. Finally, we see at the time of World War II, Theodore Dreyfus at Livonia was advertising for a young male clerk. 2 qualifications: he must speak French and he must be exempt from the draft. Others who came from the German states include, on the left, Jacob Grossman, for whom Grossman's Landing in West Baton Rouge Parish was named. He was the postmaster there, a merchant and planter, and he also owned Salina Plantation in Pointe Coupée Parish, and also was a businessman here in New Orleans. His descendants continued the Grossman name in business here for many years. There was a wholesale liquor. There was the Grossman Weinfeld Millinery Company. There was a Grossman Capeline, I think it was called, or a dandruff cure. And there was the Grappico soft drink company that was popular in Louisiana for a long time. Another enterprising family were the Manns, who were active in St. Francisville, Bayou Sara, and several towns in Pointe Coupée Parish. And to the right, you see that they had a patent medicine called Mann's Cream Liniment, which was advertised as good for use by humans, horses, and mules. France contributed many individuals and families to Southeast Louisiana, particularly Alsace, but also Lorraine, Meurthe, and we even think some came from Paris to Pointe Coupée Parish. In the upper left, we see an advertisement from the extensive Levy family. Jules Levy was another early pharmacist out in the country parishes. And you see, not only did he patent medicines and drugs, but he had a depot of Hungarian leeches. Right below is a Confederate bond that was taken by Henri Cerf, who was a native of France. He purchased this bond in Opelousas during the Civil War, but of course, by the time of his death, when it was entered into secession proceedings, it had no value. In the corner, you see the letterhead for Laser Wolf, not Laser Wolf from Fiddler on the Roof, but the son of Surf Wolf of the Burnt Bridge store. On his letterhead, you see what was typical at the time are cotton bales, and his initials are stamped into the bale. So not only did he purchase cotton, but people pledged their crops to him as they did other country merchants in exchange for their supplies throughout the year. Two of the rural merchants and planters who went on to big business in New Orleans were Simon Block, lower center left, and Isaac Levy over on the right. Mr. Block's family had been active in Opelousas as well as Pointe Coupée Parish. And he came into business in New Orleans, and eventually he and his wife and daughter all moved to Chicago. Mr. Levy, you may know the name from the Levy Rice Mill, which was a big industry here in New Orleans for many years. An especially interesting person over to the right was Meyer Kahn, who came from France. He was a merchant in Assumption Parish, near what's now called Belle Rose, Louisiana. He was a state representative, and which was kind of rare for the time. He was a Republican, whereas most of the people were Democrats at the time. He was also the mentor of the U.S. Mint. And later in life, he married Anna Bondi from New Roads. And despite his failing eyesight in later years, they moved back to New Roads, where he partnered with her brother in a fancy grocery business. And Meyer Kahn is buried in St. Mary Cemetery in New Roads in the Bondi family tomb, in the top row, in the center, directly under the cross. And it was always a point of pride that Mr. Kahn was buried amongst the community that he adopted as his own. Competitive business at the time. Here we see some advertisements from the 1880s of Picard and Weil and Abraham and Weil. Both of the Wiles have one L, but we didn't find them to be related. And the Picard was not the French Catholic Picard family of Louisiana that we know, but it was actually Bickert, B-I-C-K-A-R-T. And you can imagine that Bicart and Picard sounds alike. So maybe in order to assimilate more into the population, the family may have considered changing their name, as many families did, as you see as we'll go along. But both of these stores wanted to make everyone know that they weren't related and their businesses were not related as well. And Abraham and Weil had some pretty fierce ads. There's that vicious dog, I want you for business. That looks maybe something from the book of Daniel. And then a little later, he has this equestrian rider with sort of a simian looking face. These are from the Banner newspaper. The Austro-Hungarian Empire was said to have been the most tolerant of its Jewish residents. And of course, many of the Jewish people were ennobled by the Habsburg Empire. You notice the postcards at the left. The bottom one is of the rabbi of Pressburg, which is now known as Bratislava, who's blessing Emperor Karl and Empress Zita of Austria-Hungary on their visit. And this couple tried to end World War I as quickly as possible with loss of bloodshed, and were great humanitarians, and Karl and Zita are venerated in the Catholic Church. Among the other Austrians who came to Louisiana, is a name you may know in New Orleans, over in the upper left, was Karl Kohn, Kohn. He was a businessman and a real estate magnate, and he managed his father-in-law, Monsell White's plantation on Bayou Latinash. Monsell White, some of you may know, invented a pepper sauce that was popular in Louisiana as a condiment back in the day. But most merchants were of more modest means. The little sketch right below him by the late Glenn Morgan shows the White Store, which was the business of Aaron Schulsinger, who had come from Krakow in Poland. Well, actually, the Grand Duchy of Krakow was independent at that time when he came. His business was more typical of the rural businesses, and he's also one of the many merchants who moved from time to time as business warranted. And I think he and his family eventually ended up in Oklahoma. Below is the advertisement for Hochfelder, and their addresses are: the shipping point is Smithland Landing, which was a landing on the Mississippi River, the Smith family being the same Smith family as Howard K. Smith, who some of you may remember from television. And the name of the community was Williamsport, now known as Ennis. And of course, the Levy family and the Habers and the Blooms were all prominent at Williamsport. From Romania came the Srulovitz family, and the matriarch's name was Herskovitz. Here in Louisiana, they changed their surnames variously to Loeb or Hart. And the Hart, we think, because Max H. Srulovitz may have had Hirsch or Hart as his middle name. At the left was the store of Max Srulovitz, the elder, the uncle. And it was on Bayou Latinash, and it's shown here during the 1912 flood, apparently the day after the levee breach, because in time the water rose to 10 feet in surrounding buildings. Despite its ramshackle appearance, this store vended silk by the yard, Peter's brand shoes, and Hoyt's German colognes. Over at the right, we see his brother Isidore posting the card that in court he had his name changed from Isidore Srulovitz to Isidore Loeb. At the bottom, Pincus Srulovitz changed his name to Philip Loeb and was known as Mr. P. Loeb. He and his family operated this store at Morganza. You'll know that name from its being at the head of the Morganza floodway. And the business continued under his daughter, Mrs. Tilly Loeb Bloom, and Mr. Jack Bloom until 1965. And it was the second to last family-owned local department store in Pointe Coupée Parish, which was succeeded in longevity by Dreyfus, which continued into the 1980s. In the upper right-hand corner is a detail of a Sanborn fire insurance map, which shows Mr. P. Loeb's store in the center, and right below is a motion picture theater that produced its own electricity, and that was the business concern of a nephew, Gabriel Loeb, well, originally Srulovitz Loeb. The Russian Empire contributed many individuals and settlers, and they came from various provinces, including Bavaria, Latvia, Lithuania, Ukraine, and what was called Congress Poland. Because remember, Poland had been divided between Prussia, Russia, and Austria. The part that remained that the Russian Empire took was called Congress Poland. One of the most noted individuals who came from Bessarabia was Isaac Bigman, and we see souvenirs of him and his family over at the right. Mr. Bigman had stores on False River and in Bayou Gros Tete, and his residence was on False River. You'll notice that's a page from the 1908 False River telephone directory. And when most people did not have telephones as late as the 1960s in these rural parishes, Mr. Bigman had 3 phones. One in the main store, one in the house, and one in the cotton gin. He was in partnership with a Mr. Hughes. He married into the Waldman family. That's his wife, Rosa Waldman, right below him. She and her siblings had come from the Ukraine, and her sisters married into the Gomberg and the Novak families. In the picture of the baby is the Bigman's daughter, Miss Lillian Bigman, who I'm not going to ask anyone if they can recall in particular, but there was the Gold Rings women's store on Canal Street. She was the vice president and managing director for many years. Other families from Russia who were merchants in Southeast Louisiana include Goldman. You see Thomas Goldman has his TG stamped into the bale of cotton in the upper left, and a list of plantations on the right, which were probably plantations that he supplied throughout the year. Below is a letterhead of the Tatar brothers. They were originally Tatarsky, like Goldman from Lithuania, but abbreviated their name in Louisiana. They had several rural stores, and here in New Orleans in the 1920s founded one of the early chain stores, the Louisiana Chain Store. And the jewel in the crown was the former Abraham Israel department store on Orleans and Treme. It closed during the Depression, but the building survived until fairly recent years. I was on the street actually after it had burned, and there's some newer construction there now. And finally, in the lower left-hand corner, the American department store was a chain of stores throughout several states, throughout several southern states, and it was owned by the Singerman family that you may know here in New Orleans. I think they were members of Hevra Telim congregation. And Mr. Gus Singerman of the family sold several of the stores to the C.R. Anthony Company, and they in turn sold to Beals. From Poland, from Congress Poland, we look at Mr. Saul Bernstein, who was a well-respected dry goods and clothing merchant at Lakeland. His number you see in the False River telephone line was 2SLS. Well, what did that mean? He was on a party line number 2, and you rang, quote unquote, him by short, 1 crank, long, crank, 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 short, 1 crank. That's from the same directory that the Bigman telephone numbers were listed in. In the case of Mr. Bernstein, we see changes in place names back in the old country. He's buried, if I'm not mistaken, at Gates of Prayer, and his headstone shows him to be a native of Neustadt für Wind, which was the German name. At the bottom is the same town on a market day when the square is absolutely packed. It was called in Polish Władysław. And if I can make an attempt in Lithuanian, it's known as Kurdukos Namsistis. So when you're doing genealogy in the East, you have to remember spellings of name changes, changes in spellings, and also spellings in the place names of the communities. Mr. Bernstein's clerks included Nathan Volfish, of whom we just have a passing reference that he died off the waters of Asbury Park. And of course, Asbury Park, New Jersey was a popular summer vacation resort back in the early 19th century, so it's possible that he drowned while he was on vacation. Mr. Bernstein's other clerk was Meyer Prince, who really gave us a time tracing him, because there was a Meyer Prince from Poland married to a Itka Wolf who had 3 grandsons born within 2 years who were all named Meyer Prince. And it took me 3 tries. First, we thought he was the son of Yakov and Alvina Vol. But then we saw a newspaper reference to Mr. Bernstein and a Mr. Koritsky from Rampart Street visiting the Bigman family. So we said, well, Ezekiel and Bertha had a daughter who married a Mr. Koritsky. So it must be that Meyer. But that was wrong also. That got into print incorrectly. When I was researching an Italian family of Lakeland, the Machados, I found that Rosa Machado was married not at Lakeland, but in New Orleans to Meyer Prince. That's our man. He was the son of Solomon Prince and Bertha Lazar, as you can see from the record of their marriage in Orleans Parish. They returned to Lakeland for a while, but left due to financial difficulties during the boll weevil infestation and returned to New Orleans. Theirs was one of the rare Jewish-Italian marriages that we found during our work. Finkelstein. In that family, we are led to believe that the name was originally pronounced Finkelstein in the eastern part of Poland. And then probably after that, it was Finkelstein. And here in America, Finkelstein. You have the same case. You have Rubenstein and you have Rubenstein. Let people tell you the way they want you to pronounce their names by all means. Well, most of this family lived in New York. And Josiel Tevye Finkelstein was the patriarch. And of the children of his first marriage to Afea Rothstein was Israel Herkel, known as I.H., Nachum, who became Nathan, and Harry, who probably had an earlier Jewish name. They all came to South Louisiana and had stores. And Nathan and Harry also became wholesalers here in New Orleans. Now notice the names of their spouses. We have Chaya Yavrakovsky, which ends in S-K-I. We have Kaya, spelled not with a J, but Chaya, I should say, but spelled with an I. She was a Borovsky, S-K-Y. And then another of the daughters-in-law was Kosminski, S-K-Y. And please correct me if I'm wrong, but what we hear most is that S-K-Y comes more from the Cyrillic alphabet and is more from the Russian, and the S-K-I would be more from the ethnic Polish spellings. They were from Suwałki, in there's a postcard from that town on its market day. And at the lower right is not a Finkelstein, but one of their advocates. This was State Representative J.O. LeBeau. He was the brother of Reverend P.O. LeBeau, a Josephite priest for whom LeBeau, Louisiana, and St. Landry is named. Representative LeBeau introduced a bill in the Louisiana legislature to refund the wholesale liquor license that the authorities had the firm of Finkelstein and Friedberg by, insisting that they were wholesale merchants. And they said, no, we weren't wholesale merchants of liquor. So Mr. LeBeau introduced this bill, but unfortunately it failed. But this is one of the many instances of the interfaith solidarity in the community, how people really looked out for one another. When I was mentioning the Balms, I should have said that there's a Catholic branch of the Balm, but in the Jewish branch, Aaron Baum's son Simon and his mother, though they remained Jewish, they sang in the Catholic choirs. And when it was time for fundraising, even for Catholic churches, the Jewish merchants and planters were always at the forefront. And on a percentage-wise, there were maybe only 1% of the population. They contributed as much as 6 or 7% of the funds for the present St. Mary Catholic Church in New Roads. Okay, and we have Wiles and Wiles. We have several Wiles here. We were wild about Wiles. 2 L's and 1 L. We begin in the upper left-hand corner with Gus Weil, who was from Alsace. He married to the far left Hermina Weil, who was from Germany. So those families apparently were not related. Their daughter Bernice Weil, who's in white, married Leopold Weil from France, who is at far left in the upper right picture. Now, their daughter, who's in the center, was Ray Weil, 2 L's, journalist and humanitarian. She married Simon Weil, 1 L. And he was the son of, in the lower right-hand corner, Alphonse Weil, 1 L, and Rosina Dreyfus, who was a daughter of Theodore Dreyfus. You'll notice that Leopold was a double L while, but he was in the livestock business in Donaldsonville, Abbeville, and Lafayette, and eventually became a real estate developer, including Bendel Gardens was one of the projects he worked on, of course, named for Henri Bendel's family in Lafayette. But while he was in Donaldsonville, when the newspaper ran his ad, they only gave him one L, but we know he was a 2L while. If we go back to Gus and Hermina Wild's family over on the left, one of their sons, Julius Wild, partnered with Philip Barbier and founded the Bartwell Wholesale Dry Goods and Clothing Company in the chain of Wild's department stores, which was like Bloomingdale's for many of us in South Louisiana. Many of the smaller towns, as well as Baton Rouge and Lafayette, had Wild stores into the 1980s. And I'm old enough to remember their logo went through 3 changes, from the block letters in the photograph to the script in the middle, until finally the final way that they advertised in the 1980s. We must add too about Mr. Alphonse Wild, 1L in the lower right, that he's revered as the oldest bank president in the United States at the time of his death. He was president of the Bank of Maringouin, and he was also conversant, fluent in not only his native French, but German, Spanish, English, and of course, devotionally Hebrew. King Cotton and Queen Sugar were the basis of the economy for South Louisiana, and there was an overlap in Pointe Coupée. It was about the furthest south where cotton was produced and the furthest north where sugar was produced. And a lot of the large plantations were owned by Jewish families. At the top, we see the beautiful home Whitehall, which is believed to have been designed by Howard. It was the residence of L.W. Friedberg, who, after planning and merchandising at that location, came to New Orleans and founded a men's clothing store, succeeded by his brother. And some of you may remember Friedberg's uniforms in menswear on Canal Street next to the old Godshaw building, which was later the Marriott site. In the middle is Selena. We mentioned Jacob Grossman. That was his plantation on the lower Chenal. The Selena name comes, according to oral tradition, from a Choctaw maiden whose family had lived on the place before the Grossman period. And at the bottom is the Taylor plantation home, which was built by a relative of Zachary Taylor. This plantation came to be owned by Block and Sewell in partnership, and eventually by Simon Block in sole ownership. And of course, before the mechanization of agriculture, mules powered everything on the plantations, and horses in transportation. And active in the livestock business in West Feliciana and Pointe Coupée parishes were the Teutches. And we have relatives of the Teutsch family here, the Cats, if I'm not mistaken. At the left, we see before railroads arrived, and even after, particularly on the smaller waterways, cotton and sugarcane was transported by barge, pushed by small steamers. And the photo from the 19th century we have there, we think was taken about the location of the Surf Wolf store, later managed by his wife, which was called the Alma store. And we have Dreyfus sugar. The Dreyfus family, after so many generations, continues to produce its own sugar, and that's their logo. But interethnic families and interfaith partnerships were quite common, as had been the case with the French Catholic men and French and Protestant men of earlier ages. Some of the families descended from male European Jewish men and Creole de couleur women, and probably one of the most famous cases, because it made national television, was Bryant Gumbel. He's descended from the Gumbel family of Louisiana. The interfaith partnerships are usually a Catholic, but oftentimes a Protestant partner and a Jewish partner. And these were numerous throughout Southeast Louisiana. And we think of them as primarily being men, but in some cases it was ladies who were the partner. When you see that Seidenbach and Louisville at Frisco, was not Judah Seidenbach, but his wife, Mrs. Seidenbach, with the Gustav Loeffel, who was a Gentile. Among some of the partners who were with the Jewish people, we look at the lower left-hand side was Nepomuk Shamansky, who was Catholic from Bryson. He was the third partner of Castle and Stern, and his picture come from a Burroughs business machine ad. He founded a clothing company in Louisville, Kentucky, and the advertisement was like, the bookkeeper didn't quit because he bought her a Burroughs adding machine. He changed his name from Jan Nepomuk Shamansky to John N. Sherman, and his sons continued in the clothing manufacturing business for many years. Next is the Livonia Sawmill, which was one of the partnerships of Theo Dreyfus, this with Louis Valette. And the Valette family is still a numerous one in the area. Louis Valette's father was Desiree Valette, who was a circus performer on the name of Hercule or Hercules. Over to the right is Amy Paul Lesser. He was of the firm of Stern and Lesser, and they owned the Mayflower Saloon, which shows in the little excerpt from a Sanborn fire insurance map. After the saloon burned, and of course the business was dissolved, he ran the projector in the Opera House, the New Roads Opera House Theater, and that was located in the Masonic Temple. The Masonic meeting rooms were in the upper floor, and many Jewish men as well as Gentiles were members and held officer positions in the Masonic lodges. This lodge had been founded at Livonia, moved to New Roads, to Lakeland, back to New Roads, but it still retains the name Livonia Lodge. Similarly, the Fort Osh Lodge, which also had a Jewish membership, began at Fort Osh, Louisiana, but moved to Maringouin, and but it retained the Fort Osh name. These are some of my favorite pictures. These are from the Rougon family, which is a French Catholic family, that show Mr. Rougon and his sons visiting Mr. Bigman on Christmas Day, which of course would have been Hanukkah in 1905. So we have this visual representation of the interfaith bonds that typified these rural communities. We had American royalty. You in New Orleans will know about that. And it began with Alphonse Miltenberger, who was a planter on Rackersea, Old River, and a businessman in New Orleans. And he and his brothers owned the Miltenberger homes on Royal Street. His daughter was Amélie, for whom Café Amélie is named. She married a European banker named Michel Hein, who was Jewish. And their daughter to the right was Alice Hein, who married Albert Grimaldi, the Prince of Monaco. So even before Grace Kelly, we had an American, we had a Louisiana, we had a New Orleans Princess of Monaco. The demise for many of the Jewish merchant and planting families, as well as the general population, came in the first decade of the 20th century. As the boll weevil progressed and destroyed crops and economies in Mexico and Texas, the price of cotton went up in the rest of the South and Louisiana, and a lot of people who were producing sugarcane turned over to cotton. But in 1906, boom, here comes the boll weevil. So they lose what they had changed over to. So they went back to sugarcane, but there were two freezes, a bad freeze in 1910 and a bad freeze in 1911 that destroyed the sugar crops. And then came this awful flood of 1912, in which there were at least 65 fatalities by drowning in Pointe Coupée Parish alone. And in total, more than 40,000 people in the state were affected. Then you begin to see selling out, bankruptcy, going out of business, advertisements in these various communities. We have Irwinville, Maringouin, St. Francisville, Oscar, and Bayou Sara. A lot of these families closed their businesses in the country simply because the patrons didn't have the cash and had nothing for the credit to back up the credit to the stores, and many of them moved to New Orleans and other places. One of the ways of bolstering the future of the communities was an investment in public education that allowed children to learn and to learn professions other than agriculture that would, even though it got them out of the parish, would bring them on to other opportunities in the cities. And among the champions of public education were the Jewish merchants. In Pointe Coupée Parish alone, the Gumbles financed 3 schools. We had Simon Gumble at Lottie, Ferdinand Gumble at Frisco, Ferdinand Gumble in Bigman Lane. There was a Dreyfus School, which was near Maringouin, and over in St. Francisville was Fryhan, which I know a lot of you are familiar with that family. But those were the days of legalized segregation, and those were schools that only had white enrollments. So people like Julius Rosenwald stepped in and founded numerous Rosenwald schools. And in Pointe Coupée alone, there were schools named for him, founded by him in New Roads, which continues as an elementary, at Ventris and at Lottie. And in West Baton Rouge, the Kahn family endowed Kahn High School for African-American students, which was in operation for several decades. When we went to town, we usually went to Baton Rouge or rarer occasions to New Orleans. And in towns such as Baton Rouge, Donaldsonville, and the towns on Bayou Lafourche that escaped these periodic floods and that were not affected by the boll weevil, you had businesses that lasted for generations. And of course, we think of Godshaw's, the Sternberg business in Baton Rouge, as being one of the oldest, but they were preceded even by Rosenfields, who some of you may remember that name, which installed motor stairs. Escalator, of course, is an Otis trademark, but the Jolly Elevator Company of Baton Rouge installed that one. And that was one of the top attractions, was to ride those motor stairs, like visiting the state capitol and the Cow Palace at LSU. Other Jewish firms in Baton Rouge included Welsh and Levy, which began as a country store in West Baton Rouge Parish, but moved to Baton Rouge and was a prominent men and boys clothier for many years. At the lower left was Fahrenbacher's, which was one of the first Jewish department stores in Baton Rouge. Alas, it closed during the Depression. At the upper left-hand corner is probably the best known of the small town stores, which was Lemon in Donaldsonville. They were in planning and retail operations, and the Lemon store is now a museum. Those of you who haven't visited, I highly recommend that you do. Over to the right was the upper right was the Levy and Joseph store in White Castle. It was a competitor of Gus Wild's store, and the White Castle post office was located in Levy and Joseph, and that was quite common in the small towns, that the post office was operated in a retail operation, and the merchant, the owner, was often the postmaster. Right below there in the lower right-hand corner was the Leader store, which was owned by the Block family in Napoleonville. And sugarcane was such an important part of the economy there, as it continues to be, that instead of a fashion image, you have a tractor and a cane field on the logo. One time I came back from there and my mom asked if I had been to a Tractor Supply store. And I said, well, no. I said, that's the Leader store. I said, that's down in the Sugar Bowl. And of course, the great pilgrimage for Jews and Gentiles alike was to New Orleans. And we remember all the greats, the Maison Blanche, Godshaws, Krause of the Hyman family, which owned several stores in South Louisiana and in Lafayette. But we wonder how many of the younger generations even heard of Feebleman's, which was bought by Sears Roebuck. That's in the upper left. And below that was Friedberg's that we touched upon. And below that was Mark's Isaacs, which was on the downtown side of Canal Street. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that was the store that had an X-ray machine for when you fitted shoes. It was Imperial Shoe. Okay, thank you so much for that. And over to the left was another, was a store on the upper side of Canal, on the uptown side, was called Meyer Israel. Of course, American families have lost loved ones in that abomination that was the Shoah. And one of the most emotional parts of me working with Miss Mills in the genealogy was to see siblings of Louisiana families who perished in that awful time. And I was really distraught when I came across these names one night. And the very next day, I met with Dinah Weil, and she was showing me some pictures. And she said, well, I'm not sure if you're interested in all of these, but the picture in the middle left is of a cousin, Robert Weil, with one L, in France, who served in the French army. and not only survived, but he lived long enough to bring his wife to Livonia and meet with the family. Above is Mr. William Ruprecht Bill Katz, who was a native of Bonn in Germany, who became an American citizen and served in the United States Army. While in Louisiana, he met the Weil family. That's Mr. Simon Weil, a picture of him from when he was in the service, and he married Mr. Weil's sister, Flora. And so we round out with a few more vignettes thanking the families who contributed photos to our work. That is at the upper left, you can see the side of the Dreyfus store and the warehouse, which is now the office, and of the residence. In the middle is Mr. Simon Weil, 1L, who was the Carnival King in Livonia. As we go back through the records of Pointe Coupée, Jews and Gentiles alike participated in the carnival balls and were royalty. The entire Theo and Blondina Dreyfus family is shown at the upper right. And in the lower left is a later generation. That's Mr. Joseph and Mr. Henry Dreyfus and their spouses. And at the bottom, someone please tell me, but it seems to be labeled Mrs. Wackenheim at the Dreyfus store in Araby. And of course, the Wackenheim family was the imperial who was a Meyer, whose father, Max Meyer, had been the predecessor of Dreyfus in the business in Livonia. And for our Wiles in Lafayette, but with strong ties to Louisiana, is Mr. Leopold Weil in the center. Mr. Leopold Jr., who was very active in the prominent in the construction business on the left. And at the right is a gentleman many of you would have known of is Mr. Gus Weil, a political analyst, a playwright, and an author who we in New Roads had the pleasure, and me particularly at the library where I work, had visits by him in his later years. So thank you so much for your kind attention. And if there's anything you'd like to share about these families or communities, please feel free to do so.
Can I add something here?
Please do.
Okay, so and I don't think you covered it. I had to walk away from for a minute, but I have had an extended family in St. Francisville. Their name was Burgess, and they owned the seed and feed store. Are you familiar with that name?
Yes, ma'am. Morris Burgess.
Morris and Rena. Yeah, okay. I couldn't remember his name. I knew him by Grandma and Grandpa Berger. They weren't blood relatives. They were, their daughter, Beatty Berger Goresko, was married my uncle. And just to bring you up to date on them, their granddaughter is my cousin Jackie. We will all be in Dallas at the end of the month to celebrate her 90th birthday.
Oh, wonderful.
And the other daughter was Janet. She's Janet Burgess Dreskin. She just passed away a few weeks ago, 10 days before her 104th birthday.
Oh, my goodness.
Right. So, and she was in Greenville, during that time.
Thank you so much for calling in and sharing. This is exactly what we like to do when we present, is have people add. Thank you.
Well, I will just there's a few names I recognize. I grew up in New Orleans, and
just
somebody's bound to know me. Yeah.
We're limited on question time today, and so we invite everybody in online to add their stories in the chat as well. And we will continue to ask questions in person. So Cynthia, are there any questions?
No.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing. We appreciate it.
How many people are joining us on Zoom online tonight?
We had about 45. Yeah, 45 currently. Yeah. So
very good. Thank you so much.
Double the room.
Let them know there's books for sale.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, are there what questions do we have in person? And we'll talk to our friends online. Or things to add.
Addition, yes, sir.
You mentioned the blue store and
Yes, sir, Mr. Jack Bloom.
Father, William Katz, Jack Bloom were very close friends.
Oh, great.
And they were instrumental both. They were on the board of directors and the founding of IG Grocery Wholesale.
Ah,
Later became affiliated foods in Lafayette.
oh, wonderful. Thank you so much for adding that. Of course, I didn't know Mr. Bloom, but I know he was also adept as a spoons musician.
He played the spoon.
And that was that was from the old country, from Romania, I think, where his ancestors came from. Yes, sir.
Brian, do you stumble on any interesting information about the relationships between all these families, all these merchants and the African-American communities or the churches? Like, have you found any interesting information about the relationships in the communities of that nature?
I think they were fairly amicable as they were in the white community. A lot of the plantation owners would allot a plot of land for the African-American tenants to build churches and schools and, of course, help them in their fundraising activities. And they were a big part of the population. In fact, the African-American population was substantially larger than the white for many years until the mechanization of agriculture, when a lot of people, both African-American and white, went on to the cities for employment. Thank you.
Adding to that, my grandmother was, Dreyfus. She had a childhood companion. And her name was Liza Terrence.
Oh.
And she was a Black woman that lived in the area. My grandmother and Liza were lifelong friends.
Yeah.
They lived together, they worked, Liza worked with my grandmother at a home, in Bologna for years. They were inseparable.
Oh, wonderful.
Donna recently sent me a photograph of Liza.
Oh, great.
She'll share it with you.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing.
We have one question online and we'll go to this hand and then the folks in person, we can continue this conversation over some snacks. And the folks online, get your questions in now. So the question online is, in your research, did you find a lot of examples of anti-Semitism in?
Very little. And it's interesting that Mr. Claiborne, who was editor of the Pointe Coupée Banner, was enamored of the Jewish population. He referred to Aaron Baum as the princely merchant. The only time he said anything was when Louis Traeger, you may know that name from the Louisiana Penitentiary. He was one of the lessees at the time, was a Republican and attempted to run for a state office. And Claiborne was like, oh, no, the Jewish people are, some of our best friends are Jewish. And, they've always voted with us with the Democratic Party. So, no, I'm not, at least not in our community. I didn't, not during those days.
Thank you. And then we have this hand in person.
Yeah.
A quick clarifying question. On a previous slide, you showed, I believe, Simon Weil during his years in the military service.
Yes.
And then you had mentioned his wife. And I was wondering if you could clarify who his wife was, because I believe you had said earlier that a Simon Weil, 1L, had married Ray Weil.
I'm sorry, one L, Simon Weil, married Ray Weil, double L. Yeah.
Is that what you had said on the previous slide? I thought you'd said a different name. I couldn't recall.
Oh, I'm sorry if I did.
I think you said Flora.
No.
Oh, Flora is Mrs. Katz. Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. Flora Dreyfus Katz, Mr. Simon's sister. Yeah,
I'm trying to understand it.
yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
This is a family reunion. I mean, it's an honor to be amongst you, family and friends.